Ryan Stanton built his empire with logic, precision, and control, until the day a scruffy, silent girl saved his daughter's life and shattered every rule he thought he'd never break. The morning air in downtown Chicago was thick with noise, motion, and urgency. Horns blared from cars stuck in traffic, pedestrians hustled across crosswalks with coffee in one hand and phones in the other, and the metallic echo of the L train rattled in the distance above the city's steel skeleton. Ryan Stanton moved through it all with practiced precision, his tailored suit sharp, his jaw tighter than usual, his 6-year-old daughter Sophie trotting alongside him, her small hand clasped firmly in his. He was running late for a board meeting, but that was nothing new. Being a single father had reshaped his carefully ordered life in ways he still wasn't used to, no matter how many planners he filled or assistants he hired. Sophie, with her blonde curls bouncing and her oversized backpack nearly swallowing her small frame, tried to match his stride, talking excitedly about a drawing she'd made that morning, but Ryan only half listened. His mind was already inside the boardroom, flipping through slides, anticipating objections, counterarguments, deals waiting to be closed. He barely noticed when her grip loosened. 1 second she was there, the next, gone. She had seen something across the street, a balloon stand or maybe a dog, and darted forward without thinking. The light hadn't changed. The crosswalk was still red. Ryan looked up just in time to see her stepping into the street. The truck appeared out of nowhere. It turned fast around the corner, horn blaring, tires screaming on the asphalt. Everything slowed down. Ryan's heart slammed into his ribs. He shouted her name, but his voice was drowned in chaos. And then, another figure. A blur of brown hair and thin limbs darted from the sidewalk. A girl, maybe 9 or 10, launched herself forward with reckless speed. She reached Sophie in an instant, shoving her hard onto the curb just as the truck screeched to a halt, missing them both by a breath. The crowd gasped. Someone screamed. The driver cursed and slammed his fist on the steering wheel. Sophie was crying on the pavement, her knees scraped, but alive. And the girl, whoever she was, lay sprawled in the street, breathing hard, one arm bleeding from the fall, her eyes wide not with fear, but with something else. Caution. Expectation. Like she was waiting to be yelled at or pulled away. Ryan rushed to Sophie first, gathering her into his arms, pressing kisses into her hair, checking every inch of her as his hands trembled. But once he confirmed she was okay, his attention snapped to the other girl. She was sitting up now, wincing but silent. Her clothes were dirty, her shoes torn, her hair matted and tangled. There was no adult running toward her, no one shouting her name. She was completely alone. He approached slowly, crouching down to her level. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice rough, his heartbeat still roaring in his ears. She nodded stiffly. He looked around, scanning the street, but no one seemed to know her. "Where are your parents?" he asked. No answer. "Where do you live?" he tried again, more gently this time. The girl lifted her head and looked him straight in the eye. Her gaze didn't waver. "I don't live anywhere," she said, her voice steady and small. "I just sleep where it's safe." Something inside him broke. It wasn't the bruises on her knees or the bleeding elbow. It wasn't even the dirt on her skin or the tattered backpack slung over her shoulder. It was the way she said it. With complete acceptance. No fear. No plea. Just fact. Sophie, still sniffling, looked at the girl and whispered, "She saved me, Daddy." Then she stepped toward the stranger and wrapped her tiny arms around her neck. Ryan's throat tightened. People were still watching, but none of it mattered anymore. He stood in the middle of the street, his daughter holding a stranger with no home, and for the first time in years, tears burned behind his eyes. Not for himself. Not for what could have happened. But for the girl who had saved his child and expected nothing in return. He knelt beside her again, more slowly this time. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated. "Mia." Mia, he repeated quietly, like a vow. And though he didn't know it yet, that single name had already changed everything. Mia sat on the edge of the examination table, her legs swinging slightly as the paper beneath her crinkled with every shift. The clinic was clean, quiet, and cool, nothing like the places she was used to hiding in. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly above, and the nurse who had just cleaned her scrapes had given her a juice box she now held with both hands, like it might disappear. Across the room, Ryan stood with Sophie on his hip, still shaken but composed enough to manage a small smile whenever their eyes met. He hadn't stopped watching Mia since they arrived. After the accident, he'd made a decision in seconds. She was coming with them. No questions. No debate. He didn't know what kind of world allowed a child like Mia to exist on the edges without anyone noticing, but he wasn't going to be part of that silence anymore. He had carried both girls into his car, one crying, one quiet, and driven straight to a private clinic across town, bypassing emergency rooms and paperwork because he didn't want her falling into a system that might just spit her back out. Mia hadn't said much during the ride. She had clutched her knees to her chest in the back seat and stared out the window, her expression unreadable. Ryan tried asking a few things. Did she want music? Was she hungry? But she only responded with small nods or shrugs. Sophie had been the one to chatter on, still too young to understand the weight of what had happened. She'd thanked Mia 3 different times and offered to share her favorite stuffed animal, just until we get home. Mia didn't take it, but she smiled once, and that was enough for Ryan to know she was still open to something. Now, in the quiet of the clinic, the doctor entered with a clipboard and a kind face. She addressed Mia directly, not with pity, but with respect. That seemed to matter. "You're lucky," she said gently. "No broken bones. Just scrapes and bruises. A couple stitches on that elbow, but you'll be good as new." Mia didn't flinch. She only nodded and muttered a soft, "Thank you." Ryan watched the way she reacted to kindness like it was unfamiliar territory. After the appointment, they walked back out into the sunlight. Mia squinted against the brightness and hesitated near the car. Ryan opened the door and waited. She didn't move. "You can sit in the back with Sophie again," he said softly. "Only if you want to." She studied him for a long moment before slowly climbing in. His apartment was in a high-rise overlooking the city. Floor-to-ceiling windows, open spaces, polished surfaces, minimalist and impressive, but never meant for a child like Mia. He knew at the moment they stepped inside. She froze near the entrance, her eyes scanning everything with the cautious precision of someone who never felt safe. Sophie darted toward her playroom, already forgetting the fear of the morning, but Mia stood rooted to the floor, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. "You can sit anywhere," Ryan said. "You're safe here." That word, safe, echoed louder than he intended. Mia's eyes flicked toward him, then the couch, then back again. Eventually, she chose the floor by the window, sitting cross-legged with her back to the wall. Ryan didn't force her to move. Instead, he brought over a plate of sliced apples and crackers and set it gently on the coffee table in front of her. She looked at it, hesitated, then picked up a piece of apple like it might bite her first. While she ate in slow, careful bites, Ryan stood in the kitchen and watched. He thought about calling someone, Child Protective Services, maybe. A social worker. Someone who could take over. But the idea made his stomach twist. She had no one. That much was clear. And she had saved Sophie's life. She had risked everything, not because someone told her to, but because she chose to. He didn't want her going back to the streets. Not tonight. Not ever. Later that evening, as Sophie curled up in bed and fell asleep mid-sentence, Ryan returned to the living room. Mia was still awake, sitting in the same spot, her plate now empty, her fingers nervously folding the hem of her shirt. He sat in the armchair nearby, not too close, and asked, "Do you want to tell me anything about where you came from?" She stared at her hands. "Doesn't matter," she said. Nobody ever wants to know. I do. A long pause passed between them. Then she said, barely above a whisper, I ran away from the group home. They were mean there. Kids, staff too. I got tired of pretending I didn't care. Ryan felt his chest tighten. How long have you been on your own? Since last fall. It was spring now. That meant months. Through snow, through winter wind, through holidays spent completely invisible to the world. He couldn't imagine Sophie being alone for even a day. He leaned forward slightly. You don't have to go back there. Mia's eyes narrowed. They'll make me. Not if I can help it, he said. I don't know what the next step is yet, but you're not alone now. I promise. She didn't respond, but she didn't argue either. That night, she slept on the couch with a blanket and one of Sophie's stuffed animals at her side, not because someone handed it to her, but because Sophie had left it there quietly, and Mia had picked it up when no one was watching. Ryan stood at the hallway, watching her breathe evenly in sleep, and something deep within him shifted. This wasn't about charity or obligation. This wasn't about guilt or debt. This was the beginning of something that had no name yet, but it felt like family. The next morning arrived quietly, as soft sunlight filtered through the tall windows of Ryan's apartment. It painted gentle streaks across the hardwood floor and illuminated the slight figure still curled up on the couch. Mia slept with her knees drawn to her chest and a blanket tangled around her, as if she still expected to be cold. The stuffed animal she had taken in the night, Sophie's old bunny with one floppy ear, was clutched tightly in her arms. She didn't stir, even when Ryan stepped into the room, coffee mug in hand, and paused to look at her. There was something both fragile and fierce about her, a tension that didn't seem to relax even in sleep. He moved to the kitchen to start breakfast. It wasn't something he usually did himself. Sophie had a nanny, meals were planned, routines were precise, but that morning he didn't want precision. He wanted the smell of real food, the sound of a pan sizzling, the comfort of something ordinary. He scrambled eggs, sliced fruit, burned the toast on the first try, and started over. When Sophie woke up and wandered in, rubbing her eyes and dragging her blanket, she blinked in surprise at the smell. "You're cooking?" she asked, tilting her head in sleepy amusement. "I am," he said, smiling. "Try not to sound so shocked." Sophie giggled and climbed into one of the high chairs by the counter. Moments later, Mia appeared in the doorway, standing barefoot, her posture stiff. She looked around the kitchen like it was still a dream she hadn't decided to believe in. Her eyes landed on the table already set for three and the food waiting without expectation. Ryan noticed her hesitation. "Morning, Mia," he said gently, not making her the center of attention, but acknowledging her all the same. "You hungry?" She nodded slowly, eyes darting from him to Sophie, who waved at her casually like she belonged there. Mia approached cautiously, like she still expected someone to change their mind. She sat at the far end of the table, barely making a sound as she began to eat. Her movements were small, careful, efficient, like someone used to saving food for later just in case there wasn't a next time. Ryan didn't ask questions while they ate. Instead, he let Sophie chatter about school, her favorite cartoon character, and how she had decided pink wasn't the best color anymore, purple was cooler. Mia listened quietly, occasionally letting a ghost of a smile flicker across her face. It was the first time she had been in a home where breakfast wasn't rushed, forced, or absent entirely. It was the first time anyone had served her a plate and sat across from her without suspicion. After breakfast, Ryan made some calls. He cancelled his meetings, cleared his schedule for the week. His company could survive without him for a few days. This, whatever this was becoming, was more important. He spent the morning researching child welfare laws, options for guardianship, and legal protections. Every site he visited made it clear, taking in a runaway child was legally complicated. He could be investigated, she could be taken back by the system, and the more time passed, the harder it would be for her if she had to leave. But when he looked into the living room and saw Sophie braiding Mia's hair, both girls sitting cross-legged on the rug, their heads bent close together as they whispered about something only they understood, he knew what he had to do. He picked up the phone and called his attorney. "I need to find a way to keep a child safe," he said simply. "She's not mine. But she could be." The rest of the day passed with a strange calm. They went to the park in the afternoon. Sophie ran ahead to the swings, while Mia stayed close, her steps tentative, eyes scanning the surroundings like a soldier in unfamiliar territory. Ryan walked beside her, not pushing, not asking, just being there. At one point, she looked up at him and asked quietly, "Are you going to send me back?" He stopped walking. His answer was steady. "No. Not unless you want to go. And even then, I'll make sure it's a place that's safe. But if it's up to me, you stay here." She looked away, hiding whatever flickered in her eyes. But she didn't walk ahead. She stayed beside him. That night, when the girls were tucked in, Mia now in a real bed, in a guest room they had transformed together with borrowed books and clean sheets, Ryan sat alone in the living room, scrolling through photos on his phone. Pictures of Sophie as a baby, her first steps, her first day of school. And then, finally, the photo he had taken that morning, Sophie and Mia at the table, laughing, powdered sugar on their lips from the toast. He saved it with a name he didn't think twice about, family. The following week unfolded with a rhythm that was unfamiliar but strangely comforting. For the first time in years, Ryan's life didn't revolve around shareholder reports or back-to-back meetings, but around school drop-offs, after-dinner games, and the constant presence of two little girls who were quickly becoming inseparable. Sophie had taken to calling Mia her secret sister, a title she wore with pride, whispering it like a magical code they shared between them. Mia, at first hesitant, now laughed more freely, though her smiles still came with an undercurrent of caution, as if joy might vanish at any moment. Ryan watched this transformation with quiet awe. Every day, he saw small shifts in Mia, the way she no longer jumped at sudden sounds, the way she reached for food without asking first, the way she began to meet his eyes when speaking. But with every step forward, he also saw the weight she carried. At night, she still checked the locks on the windows. She never fully unpacked the few things she had. She kept her shoes near the door, always ready to run. He had spoken to his lawyer twice more since that first call. The situation was delicate. Legally, Mia was considered a missing child. If the authorities found out he was sheltering her without notifying child services, there could be consequences, serious ones. And yet, everything in him rebelled at the idea of letting her go back to the system that had failed her so completely. His lawyer had suggested a path forward: file a report, but accompany it with a formal petition for emergency guardianship, supported by evidence of neglect or danger in her previous placement. The process would be invasive and slow, but it could give Mia a real shot at staying with him. That evening, after Sophie had fallen asleep with a book still open on her chest, Ryan found Mia in the kitchen, sitting alone with a glass of water, her feet swinging off the tall stool. She looked up when he entered but didn't move. He joined her, sitting across the island. "There's something I want to talk to you about," he said gently. "I've been speaking with someone who can help make sure you stay safe. But it means, other people will need to know where you are. Adults. From the city. Social workers." Her face stiffened immediately. Her fingers clenched around the glass. "They'll send me back," she said, her voice flat, almost resigned. "They always send you back. Doesn't matter if it's bad." "I won't let that happen," he said firmly. "I'm going to ask to become your guardian. It's not easy, but I'm willing to fight for it. I just need your permission to try." She didn't answer right away. She stared at the counter for a long moment, her eyes narrowed, thinking. "Why?" she finally asked. "Why would you want to?" Ryan exhaled slowly. "Because you saved my daughter. And because you matter. Not just because of what you did, but because of who you are. You deserve more than survival. You deserve a home. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. Instead, she whispered, I don't know what a real home feels like. He leaned in, voice quiet but steady. Then let's find out together. The next day, they began the process. Paperwork was filed. Mia was officially registered with a school district. A caseworker was assigned. There were interviews, evaluations, and a home inspection. Through it all, Mia remained still and quiet, answering questions in short, clipped sentences. But when the social worker left, and Ryan looked at her with concern, she simply said, I didn't lie. I just didn't know how to tell her that I don't want to leave. Ryan walked over, crouched beside her, and said, You don't have to convince them. That's my job now. Over the next few weeks, their life became a balance of routine and waiting. There were school lunches, weekend movies, visits to the park, and court dates on the horizon. The girls painted pictures that filled the fridge. Mia drew a house with a long driveway and 2 girls in matching dresses. When Ryan asked who they were, she looked at him and said, That's me and Sophie. We're going somewhere safe. He kept the picture, tucked inside his briefcase, next to contracts and strategy memos, a reminder of what truly mattered. And when he caught Mia humming to herself while brushing her teeth, or saw her asleep without checking the door 3 times, he knew something rare and fragile was starting to grow between all of them, trust. Not the kind you earned with words, but the kind built through showing up again and again. He didn't know what the court would decide yet. But for the first time, Mia had a bed that was hers. A hand to hold when she was afraid. A place where someone made her breakfast and meant it when they said, I'll be right here. It wasn't perfect. But it was real. And for Mia, that was already more than she had ever dared to hope for. The day of the custody hearing arrived with a gray sky hanging low over the city. It wasn't raining, not yet, but the clouds looked heavy, as if they were holding back something inevitable. Ryan stood in front of the mirror adjusting his tie with fingers that moved slower than usual. He hadn't felt this kind of nervousness in years, not before launching a company, not before facing a hostile acquisition, but this was different. This wasn't about shareholders or numbers. This was about a little girl with brown eyes who had changed his life in a matter of days and who now sat at the breakfast table quietly peeling the corner of her napkin while Sophie tried to distract her with talk about juice flavors. Mia hadn't said much that morning. She'd woken up early and dressed herself in a pale sweater and jeans, her hair brushed with extra care, but her eyes were shadowed. It was clear she was expecting the worst. She didn't cry. She didn't ask questions. She just waited, like someone who had learned long ago that good things never lasted. The courthouse felt cold. Too big. Too bright. Ryan held Mia's hand the whole way through security, his grip gentle but firm. Sophie had stayed home with a sitter, and for the first time in weeks, the apartment had felt incomplete when they'd left. His attorney met them in the hallway, offering a calm nod and a folder full of paperwork that somehow felt heavier than any legal document Ryan had ever signed. Mia walked beside him, small and silent, her eyes scanning every corner of the courthouse like it might be a trap. Inside the courtroom, the judge was a middle-aged woman with silver hair pulled tightly into a bun. Her eyes were sharp, her voice steady. She'd read the file already, knew the context. But Ryan could tell she wasn't one to be swayed by emotion. Facts mattered. Stability mattered. The law mattered. The representative from Child Services spoke first. She outlined Mia's history, her time in the group home, her disappearance, her lack of prior placement. She mentioned Ryan's status as a non-relative caregiver and the urgency of determining a long-term plan. It was clinical. Detached. It reduced Mia to bullet points and timelines, and Ryan hated it. Then his attorney stood and spoke with careful precision, walking through the days Mia had spent with Ryan and Sophie, the safety and structure provided, the psychological evaluations that showed improvement, the testimonies from Mia's school and her therapist. Photos were submitted, of Mia smiling in the park, of the girls baking cookies, of the three of them sitting at the kitchen table with crayons scattered everywhere. Finally, Ryan was called to the stand. He stood, placed a hand on the Bible, and sat down under oath, his heart thudding. The judge looked at him over the rim of her glasses. "Mr. Stanton, you're a single father, correct?" "Yes." "You run a major corporation?" "Yes." "You have no previous connection to this child prior to the incident?" "No, I didn't know her." "So why are you doing this?" Ryan looked at Mia, who sat at the table, her hands folded in her lap, eyes lowered. Then he turned back to the judge. "Because the day she pushed my daughter out of the path of a moving truck, she didn't just save Sophie's life, she changed mine. I saw a child who had nothing and gave everything. And I realized I had everything and was doing nothing. She deserves more than a roof and food. She deserves to be chosen. Not placed. Not managed. Loved. She's not my blood, but I love her like she is. And I will fight for her, as long as I have breath in my body." The room went still. Even the judge took a beat before speaking again. "Thank you, Mr. Stanton." She turned to Mia. "Would you like to say anything, sweetheart?" Mia looked up slowly. Her voice was small but steady. "I don't know how to say things right like grown-ups do. But I like our house. I like Sophie. I like when Mr. Stanton reads to me and makes pancakes, even when they're too dark. I feel safe. I never had that before. I don't want to leave. I don't care about beds or toys. I just want to stay." Ryan didn't blink. He couldn't. If he did, he'd break. The judge looked down at the papers in front of her. She didn't speak for a long time. Then she folded her hands and said, "The law isn't just rules. It's also reason. And the reasonable thing is clear. Effective immediately, temporary guardianship is granted to Mr. Ryan Stanton. A full adoption hearing will follow pending further review, but for now, Mia stays home." Mia didn't react at first. She just stared ahead, frozen. Then slowly, her shoulders dropped. The fear lifted from her face like fog giving way to sun. Ryan walked over, knelt down, and opened his arms without saying a word. She didn't run. She didn't ask. She just walked into them and didn't let go. The days following the court hearing were filled with a quiet kind of joy that none of them knew how to name. There was no dramatic celebration, no streamers or cake, just peace. And for Mia, that was everything. It was in the small things, waking up without fear, falling asleep without checking the door 3 times, brushing her teeth next to Sophie while humming a silly tune, and setting the table without being asked. She was still careful, still cautious, but the weight she carried began to shift. It was no longer survival, it was adaptation, slowly blooming into belonging. Ryan noticed the change in her most clearly one Saturday morning when he walked into the living room and saw her curled up on the couch with Sophie, reading aloud from a picture book. Her voice was calm, steady, and when Sophie giggled, Mia smiled without hesitation. No glancing around for danger. No flinching. Just presence. He stood in the doorway for a long moment and didn't interrupt. He didn't want to break whatever magic was happening between them. It was the first time he truly believed this wasn't temporary, this was their life now. He started including Mia in more than just routines. He brought her to the office one afternoon when he had to pick up documents and let her sit in his chair while Sophie pushed buttons on the desk phone and pretended to run the company. His employees, used to the sharp-tongued, business-first version of Ryan, looked stunned when he smiled and knelt beside the girls to answer pretend calls about stuffed animal deliveries and cookie emergencies. Some of them took photos, unable to resist the contrast between who he had been and who he was becoming. Ryan didn't care. He wasn't performing. He was simply living differently now, with intention, with love. At home, they began traditions. Friday night became pizza night, with toppings chosen by vote. Sundays were for pancake breakfasts, whether they were fluffy or burnt. Mia helped Sophie with homework, even though she was still catching up on some things herself. She had been out of school too long, and her reading level wasn't quite where it should be, but she tried. Ryan hired a tutor who came twice a week, not because he wanted her to achieve quickly, but because she deserved support. She was smart, sharp, observant, and once she trusted that mistakes wouldn't be punished, she began to bloom. One night, after dinner, Mia came into the kitchen while Ryan was drying dishes and asked, "Can I help?" It was such a simple question, but for her to offer, unprompted, meant more than he could express. He handed her a towel, and together they worked in silence, side by side. When they were done, she hesitated and then said, almost too quietly, "Do you still want to keep me?" Ryan turned to face her, crouching so their eyes were level. "Every single day," he said. "Every single moment. There's not a version of this family without you in it." She nodded, biting her lip. "Even if I mess up sometimes?" He smiled gently. "Especially then. That's what families are for." That night, she didn't sleep with the stuffed animal Sophie had given her. Instead, she held on to the picture frame Ryan had printed for her that day, an image of all three of them standing in the park, arms around each other, sun glowing behind them. On the bottom was a caption Ryan had written, "Family is the home you choose and fight for." In the quiet, after the girls had gone to bed and the apartment had settled, Ryan sat on the couch alone for a moment, staring at that same photo on his phone. His world had changed completely. He no longer woke up thinking about mergers and margins. He thought about school pickups, favorite cereals, and which bedtime story hadn't been read yet. He had lost control in the best way, and in that loss, he had found something real. He didn't know what the future held, whether the final adoption hearing would be smooth or complicated, whether more legal challenges would arise, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Mia belonged here. She wasn't just the girl who had saved his daughter. She was now his daughter too, in every way that mattered. And he would keep choosing her, again and again, as long as she needed him. The day of the final adoption hearing came quietly, without fanfare or countdown, but it carried a weight that lingered in the air from the moment the sun rose. Ryan woke up early, long before the girls stirred, and stood by the window watching the city slowly come to life. It wasn't nerves, exactly, but something deeper, an awareness that what they had built, what they had fought for, was finally about to become permanent. He already loved Mia as his daughter. She had already taken root in his heart, already become stitched into the fabric of every part of their daily life. But now, the world would recognize it too. When Mia came into the kitchen that morning, still in her pajamas and rubbing her eyes, she found a plate of pancakes waiting with strawberries cut into little hearts. Sophie was already at the table, bouncing with excitement, wearing a bright yellow dress she had picked out for the big day. Mia paused in the doorway, watching them, and for a moment her expression was unreadable, somewhere between disbelief and fragile joy. She'd had months to get used to being wanted, to feeling safe, but there was still part of her that didn't quite trust that this happiness wouldn't be taken away. Ryan walked over, crouched beside her, and touched her shoulder gently. "Today we make it official," he said. "Today, you become mine in every way. You already are. But now it'll be on paper too." She didn't smile right away, but she gave a small nod and leaned into his side just long enough for him to know she understood. They dressed with care, Ryan in a navy suit, Sophie in her sunshine yellow dress, and Mia in a soft white sweater dress that she had picked out herself, her brown hair pulled back neatly by Sophie's careful hands. On the way to the courthouse, the car was filled with quiet music and nervous energy. Mia held Sophie's hand the entire ride, her other hand clutching the corner of the sketchbook she always carried with her. It was her safety net, her way to process the world. She hadn't said what she drew inside. The courtroom was smaller this time, more intimate. No social workers. No opposing attorneys. Just their lawyer, the judge, and a clerk. Ryan's attorney had prepared everything with precise attention to detail, making sure the process would be smooth. When the judge entered, she gave them a small smile, one of recognition, warmth, and a hint of pride. It was the same woman who had granted temporary guardianship. She remembered. After reviewing the final documents, the judge turned to Mia. "You've had some time to live with Mr. Stanton," she said kindly. "Has it been a good home for you?" Mia nodded, then stood up, surprising even Ryan. She cleared her throat and said quietly, "It's the first home that feels like it's mine." The judge's expression softened, and she glanced at Ryan. "And you, Mr. Stanton, still wish to adopt Mia as your legal daughter?" "With all my heart," he answered, without a second of hesitation. The judge picked up her pen, signed the order, and looked back at them. "Then let it be known," she said, smiling, "that Mia Stanton is now and forever the legal daughter of Ryan Stanton." Sophie clapped so loudly the judge chuckled. Mia didn't move right away. She just stared at the signed papers, as if trying to absorb that they were real. Ryan knelt in front of her, opened his arms, and this time, she ran into them. Not with hesitation, but with full force. She clung to him with a grip that said more than words ever could. When they walked out of the courthouse, the sun had broken through the clouds. It was warm, golden, like the world itself was offering its blessing. They stopped at the steps to take a photo, Mia in the middle, holding both Ryan's and Sophie's hands, her face serious but radiant. She held up her sketchbook and showed them what she'd drawn, the three of them, standing in front of their apartment building, beneath a banner that read, "Home." Over their heads, she had drawn a sun and, in shaky but clear handwriting, had written, "Nothing to run from now." Ryan blinked back tears. It was simple, it was raw, and it was everything. Not long after, they returned home and had ice cream for lunch, because rules didn't matter that day. Mia wore her new name like armor and light all at once. She laughed with her whole body. And that night, as Ryan tucked her in, she looked up at him and said, "You don't have to say you'll stay anymore." "I know." And she was right. Because from that moment on, there was no more question, no more waiting. She wasn't just living in his home, she was his family. Forever. 1 year after the adoption, everything had changed, and at the same time, the most important things had stayed exactly the same. Mia now lived in the room across from Sophie's, painted soft blue with stars on the ceiling and shelves filled with books and sketchpads. Her clothes hung neatly in her own closet. Her name, Mia Stanton, was printed on school forms, birthday invitations, and even a library card she proudly kept in her backpack. But what truly made it real wasn't the documents or the labels. It was the quiet mornings, the loud dinner tables, the rhythm of life lived together. Ryan had changed too. He still ran his company, still wore suits and made high-stakes decisions, but his priorities had shifted entirely. His office now had framed photos of both girls on his desk. He never missed a school play or parent-teacher meeting. His calendar included early morning breakfasts and late-night story time. He no longer measured success by numbers on a screen, but by the sleepy smile on Mia's face when she hugged him goodnight, or the way Sophie bragged to strangers, "My dad is the best dad, and he's not just mine anymore." Sophie and Mia had grown inseparable, more like twins than girls born years apart. They fought over toys and made up in minutes. They whispered secrets long after bedtime and giggled under shared blankets during movie nights. Ryan would often stand in the hallway, just listening to the sound of their laughter bouncing off the walls, and feel a kind of peace he never knew he was missing. But even in peace, Mia's past sometimes surfaced. There were nights when she'd wake up from dreams she couldn't describe, or days when a certain sound or scent pulled her away into memory. Ryan never pushed. He didn't try to erase where she came from. Instead, he created space for her to speak when she was ready. Sometimes she did. Sometimes she just needed to be held in silence. He made sure she always had both. One afternoon, while Sophie was at a friend's house and the apartment was unusually quiet, Ryan found Mia in the living room, staring at an old photograph she had drawn months ago. It was the one she made right after the adoption, showing the three of them under a banner that said, "Home." She looked older now, more confident, but the look on her face as she traced her finger along the paper was filled with emotion. He sat beside her on the couch. "Thinking about that day?" he asked. She nodded. "I still don't believe it sometimes," she said. "That I get to stay. That this is real." "It is," he said gently. "And you never have to doubt it again." Mia looked at him, then reached for a newer sketchbook on the table. She flipped to a drawing she had finished just that morning. It showed an older version of herself, standing between Ryan and Sophie. Behind them was a house with a garden, a big tree, and a dog with floppy ears. At the top, in bold letters, she had written, "Where your soul gets to rest." Ryan stared at the picture for a long moment. "Is that where we're going?" he asked. She smiled, the soft kind of smile she once kept locked away. "It's where we already are." Later that evening, as the sun began to set, the three of them sat out on the balcony wrapped in a shared blanket. The city buzzed quietly below, but up there it felt like a different world. Ryan had one arm around each daughter, his heart full in the most human, imperfect, beautiful way. He didn't need a fortune to feel rich. He didn't need applause to feel valued. He had built many things in his life, but nothing meant more than the two girls leaning against him now. Mia looked up at him and said, almost sleepily, "Thank you for choosing me." He kissed the top of her head and whispered, "Thank you for letting me." And in that quiet, in that space between all they had survived and all they had to look forward to, they sat as a family, complete not because they were perfect, but because they were real. And for Mia, who once lived in shadows, it was the beginning of a life lived fully in the light. This ending holds a quiet, deeply earned power. It doesn't rely on dramatic twists or last-minute rescues, but instead finds strength in healing, in trust built over time, and in the choice to love someone not because you have to, but because your heart insists on it. What makes the conclusion beautiful isn't that it wraps everything up with a bow, but that it shows growth, Mia learning to believe she deserves stability, Ryan becoming the kind of father he never imagined he could be, and Sophie learning what it truly means to share love without limits. There's something especially moving about the idea that home isn't where you come from, it's where someone chooses you, stays, and lets you rest. The story closes with warmth, but also with realism. These characters aren't perfect, and their journey was hard, but that makes the ending feel not only satisfying, but real. It reminds us that sometimes family is not found by blood, but by the moments when someone shows up again and finally says, "I'm not leaving." Not ever.